And welcome, Hoosier Nation, to our 110th episode of the Hoosier Sound, where we are the official podcast of Indiana HQ. We are recording this edition of the Hoosier Sound on Tuesday evening, October 15th, 2019, where I am your host, Noah Freeman. On the docket for tonight, we got a couple of things. Just a quick Rutgers recap. The homecoming win. The Hoosiers in Bloomington again at homecoming defeated the Rutgers Scarlett Knights 35 to nothing for their second shutout victory of the season. After that, we kind of talk about the upcoming games and the upcoming schedule that Indiana has, and we also preview the Maryland game that is coming up this Saturday, which is a pretty big game as of this point for what the expectations are starting to build for with this football team. But here with me tonight to cover all of that, there's just two of us tonight. It's a duo. Andrew is away and Matt is coming back on a plane from Bloomington. So it's just Nithin and Noah. Nithin, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great, Noah. It's another week. We're just rolling along here. Football season's been interesting to say the least for IU. And no, there's nothing much more to it. I wish I had something witty to say, but I don't. Big stretch coming up for the Hoosiers, that's for sure.
Yep. Just like you said, football, we're in the thick of it. Same thing with the NFL. I'm finally in a really good mood after this weekend. Both of my football teams this weekend the defense scored on the very first play of the game and had very big victories. Plus, no, I'm not a Nats fan, but I live in DC, and poor Nats fans, especially with the Bryce Harper, all of it. Right now, as we're recording this, it's 7-0 in the first inning, and the Nats DC is going to the World Series basically. So it's good times in sports over from this neck of the world. But let's move on to, and I mean, before we move on, Nathan, do you have any? Because I know obviously your Cubbies aren't in it, but are you rooting for the Nats, or are you particularly like partial to the Astros or the Yankees, depending on how that goes?
Actually, I find myself rooting for Washington. I texted my brother that the other day when they knocked out the Dodgers in the first round. So, the Nationals played some pretty exciting baseball, especially in that Game 5 win where Howie Kendrick hit that extra innings grand slam to put them into the NLCS. And then I'm not rooting for St. Louis. So, I had the Nats in this round, and the Astros and the Yankees, they'll be fine. So, Washington obviously has never won before. So
Yep.
it would be pretty cool to see a little parade action in DC.
Oh yeah, especially after the Caps, it's good for some DC sports to be good because usually DC sports are terrible. But I did see a picture that I thought everyone would find funny, even if you follow baseball a little bit. There was a picture of the Nats going to the NLCS, and it was like ticket prices $200, parking $40, food and drink at the game $70, getting to the NLCS for the first time in team history, priceless.
Oh,
Was the caption.
all right.
Priceless.
Okay.
It was
Now,
really
look,
funny.
if I'm a Nationals fan, which I'm not, all I would say is just celebrate the guys on your team. Stop wasting time on guys who aren't there anymore. Like Juan Soto, what an unbelievable hitter for somebody who's 20 years old. It's ridiculous, but
Yeah.
I would just celebrate the guys on your team. Stop taking
Which
shots at Harper.
most people are. It's just
Yeah.
people are obviously salty about that over here. But let's get into some football. Of course, as I mentioned, Rutgers, Indiana beats Rutgers 35 to nothing. We had some different thoughts on the outcome of the game because, of course, when you get a blowout against a team that's sub 100 ish around that level, the very bottom of the FBS, it's kind of hard to really take anything meaningful out of it when you're playing a team that's just that different of a caliber and you're expected to win by 35 points, have the other team get shut out or score a field goal or a touchdown or something. So after the entire game was all said and done, Nathan, what have your thoughts been on just the outcome of the game after the Hoosiers moved to 4-2 and do what they were expected to do, winning 35 to nothing for their second shutout on the season?
Yeah, that's how I looked at it. Everyone's gonna to look at a game like that differently. The IU took care of business against a team that was very, very bad. There's just no other way to say it.
Yeah,
I
as
mean,
as we previewed and talked about on last week's show.
Yeah, they met expectations, if not exceeded it, as far as just how lousy Rutgers was. One passing yard. I just, it almost looks, it kind of looks like when you were younger and you just beat up on the computer in like easy mode on Madden. And
Yeah.
at the end of the day, you looked at the other team stats, and the quarterback was 5 for 13 with one passing yard, and that's what happened. And Johnny Langan he topped 100 passing yards against Maryland, but
Yep. Mm-hmm.
against IU, it was the passing game was non-existent, almost literally. And then for me, it's like, all right, you won the game, you covered, in case people care about that, and then the
If you are
and then,
not a Purdue student and bet on the game.
and then and then the other aspect of it is that they come out of the game healthy, and there was a scare,
Ugh.
a big one, during the game.
Mm-hmm.
I believe it was late in the second quarter when Hunter Littlejohn, IU senior center, went down in a bit of a heap in the end zone, and he was getting medical assistance and walked off very slowly. And look, I got visions back to that Croy Kronk injury from the UConn game, and I was wondering, my gosh, it didn't look as bad live, certainly, but is this another instance where IU lost a key player in a game where they were pretty much in cruise control? And fortunately, the answer seems to be no. Fortunately, it looks like Little John is all right. I don't know if he's going to play against Maryland necessarily, but he seems to be in a situation where he should return at some point this season. Of course, college teams are very tight-lipped about injuries, but
Yeah.
obviously the center position is so valuable on a football team, especially the offense. That connection with the quarterback is so important. And Lil John's the center. Like, there's no other way to look at it there. So that's that. Michael Penix looked good once again, and it's almost seems like we're burying the lead a little bit. I tell you, I watched Nate Sudfeld play quarterback at Indiana, and I'm watching Michael Penix, and the ball just explodes off Penix's arm, unlike anything I saw from Sudfeld, and Sudfeld was pretty darn good. Penix's arm strength is a bit jaw-dropping, especially when he shoots the ball 30, 40 yards down the field looking for Whop Philyor. The play where Little John got injured was almost jaw-dropping. Penix just flicked the ball 55 yards down the field from his own end zone and connected with Whopper on the 50. And it was just like, oh, cool. He made that look pretty easy.
In
No
like the
big
blink
deal.
of an eye almost.
He looped it over two Rutgers defenders too, in order for Philyor to run under that football, and he made it look easy. It was unbelievable, and the guy's only a redshirt freshman. So really, you talk about the sky being the limit. It's true for Michael Penix, and I touched on him a little bit earlier, but Whop Philyor has emerged as a key, if not the key, receiver in this offense. And there are a lot of good ones. Nick Westbrook's really good. Donovan Hill's really good. Ty Freifogel caught a touchdown on Saturday, but Whop seems to be the focal point, if anything else, under this Kalen DeBoer offense. And look, at the end of the day, though, Rutgers is really bad. Like, that's what it kind of all comes down to. And these next three games are, I don't know, program defining. Is that being too? If nothing else, it's at least a standard. It's a measure as to where this program is. Tom Allen's talked so much about, hey, we want to gain that respect. We feel like we're good enough. We think we can go out there and play. And well, the next 3 weeks are going to show that, starting on Saturday.
Yeah, I think the biggest point you touched on, I think that's what everyone took out of the game mostly, was, of course, you go into a game like that, like you said, and the only thing you want to come away with in a big victory like that against a much lower caliber team is just to be healthy. Of course, Indiana didn't have that happen, and you mentioned about how important the center position is. Not only do they have to block and do everything the other blockers do, but of course they have to snap the ball, and that just adds an extra thing that's really important, because you look at backup centers, and backup centers sometimes do have a hard time getting the ball to the quarterback, whether it's in under center, in the shotgun, sometimes the pistol, whatever it may be. It's just very different, and it's even different for the quarterback themselves, because the person in front of them might be a different height, and it just changes a bunch of things. Then you add on the point that not all the time, but usually the center is the captain of the offensive line, just because he's the closest in the middle. He can call out switches. He can call out if the defense is doing audibles, if someone shows that they're going to blitz. Hey, who's going to pick up this guy? He's the guy really just running the offensive line. And I don't remember necessarily how things have changed. If the captain of the offensive line per se has changed since Coy Cronk went out, and the line has been shifting a lot, but he's been a stable guy compared to everyone shifting on the ends. And he was a really important guy. So like you said, I would also think that he probably will not be playing on Saturday, if not later. As we've seen with multiple people, especially Michael Penix, college injuries get a bit dicey with releasing information, which is I'm totally okay with. It's just hard sometimes when you're like, oh, it'd be nice to know if he's gone 2 weeks or 8 weeks or just a physical timetable, not necessarily even knowing what the extent of the injury is. It's just like, oh, it'd be nice to know he's going to come back at this date or something. But I think it'd be safe to say just the way he walked off, at least plan for him not being there Saturday. And at least the semi good news, the Maryland defense is not bad. We're going to get into that later, but the strength of their defense is not in their defensive line. So at least that's something to hold on to, and we'll dive into that a little bit more later. But yeah, it's kind of a weird game to take away. You talked about a lot of the stuff Michael Penix did, and I that wasn't even his best game. I don't think you saw a lot of aspects where he looked human, especially against Rutgers, and that's also just, man, what was that? His like fourth game that he started, basically. I don't know, fourth or fifth, something around there, that he's really started, since he hasn't even started every game this year, let alone got like one to two chances last year. And yeah, like you said, it's just the ceiling that you see from him is something that's just incredible. And even though you had the interceptions and whether it was him or the receiver doing all that kind of stuff, it was just the potential he has, especially when you take a step back and think that he's such a rookie compared to everything else. Yet right now in our minds, it seems like he's been here a year, and just the way he's playing, the way he's already into the offense, it seems like he's been here at least a year and starting at least a year, if not 2 to 3 years. So the other thing that stood out to me, because you talked a little bit, of course, Watt Fillier, this was his fourth career game with 10 plus receptions, which is an IU record. So congrats to him going into the IU record book. He had 182 yards. I think that's kind of the guy that Michael Penix, not just Kalen DeBoer, likes. I think Michael Penix has really found a way in liking how Watt Fillier's been running around with him. But I really like to see how Stevie Scott actually was able to get something going. It was especially when because he still ran when Hunter Littlejohn went out, and they had to piece together an offensive line differently, move an entirely different center in the game, no less. Not that they didn't even get a week of practice of whoever was under center. And at least it was nice to see him going. You also saw him break out for a run of 57 yards, and he was able to average 13.7 yards per carry, which that's receiver averages, basically, with how many yards he was averaging. And even if you take out that 57-yard long, he's still averaging, if I can do really quick math, like about 10, just over 10 yards per carry, which is really good. It was nice to see him going, even if it was against a poor defense, because we saw earlier that Stevie Scott in the offensive line was not able to run all over even poor defenses and poor defensive line. So it was nice to see Stevie Scott run all over Rutgers, even if he didn't score a touchdown.
Well, and his his effectiveness is going to be extremely important in Big Ten play. And, he's talked about it before, and it's only going to take on a life of its own here coming up. He's a really key contributor to this offense. I was a little bit surprised he wasn't used more, in all honesty. There were a number of instances where guys like Ronnie Walker and Samson James got the carry inside the 5-yard line, and I think that's a factor of Tom Allen just trying to get guys more involved, which is fine. I mean, that's the game to do it. But when you talk about Maryland and Nebraska coming up, Northwestern in a few weeks, in Bloomington, I think you might see Stevie Scott get 20, 25 carries. It's that he's that kind of difference maker, especially, he's only a sophomore. It feels like we've seen this guy play on IU now for a few years now. This is only year 2 for Stevie Scott. And assuming they can get Hunter Littlejohn back and going in short time, that'll be very useful going forward for the Hoosiers. Also, you talked about the chemistry between Fillior and Michael Penix. It was funny after the game on Saturday. Wap was talking about how he and Penix do a lot of stuff together, including play Fortnite and NBA 2K. So I think we're seeing a little video game trend among our among our IU athletes, right? We talked about we talked to Jordan Geronimo a few weeks ago. He was into Super Smash Brothers, and now it looks like WAP and Penix are into 2K and Fortnite. I mean, it's not surprising, but it was just funny. And then he said, don't quote me on that actually helping us, but you know.
I mean, it doesn't ever hurt to actually get closer to the guys off the field, no matter what you're doing. I also guess they weren't playing Fortnite late Sunday into Monday, if you heard about that debacle. But yeah, you talked about Stevie Scott getting a lot more carries. There were 38 total rushing attempts, which even if you take out the quarterback rushing attempts for scrambling the ball whatsoever, that's about 34 attempts. Even if you have some of those garbage time minutes running the ball and everything, trying to just to run down the clock, get the game over with. That's still, you had Stevie Scott, Sampson, James, even had David Ellis get a bunch of carries in there technically, even if they were some of those sweep ones. In there, you got Ronnie Walker Jr. with 3. That's still well over 20 carries that the defense was planning on, or the defense, the offense was planning on running. So yes, I agree. Like you said, I think we could see a lot of carries from him because now that we're past a lot of the minus Michigan State, we've played all of the teams that are a lot farther below Indiana's level, and we played the team that was incredibly above Indiana's talent level, which is, it looks like right now they're very above almost every single team in the entire nation right now, which that loss is looking better and better as the weeks go on. But now that the lower level opponents are starting to and basically have gone away completely. Now is when you want to see, it's like when basketball, where those November games you see a bunch of lineups in there. Now it's kind of where things tighten down. You see a lot of the for real starters, the ones that are going to get the most minutes of the game, start to play. And speaking of, let's move over to the defense, because the defense is of course a unit that we've seen, I don't even know, 40, 50 people, I feel like, play between the beginning of the season and now half of those games, because Tom Allen really likes to play a lot of those younger guys, because to his credit, those younger guys have really been able to show out for a lot of plays, and they've forced him to put them on the field at least a little bit, let alone you got that 4-game red shirt. But let's move over to the defensive side a little bit. Was the defensive side kind of just more of what we've seen, or did they impress you a little more? Did they disappoint you a little more? Just kind of more of the same? We just have to wait and see when the talent level changes.
Yeah, they played really well on Saturday. There's no other way to say it, honestly. The Joneses, Cam and Raekwon, both did excellently for IU on Saturday. Cam Jones had a really nice sack in there. He had a big third down tackle. Raekwon Jones, I believe, ran in the touchdown to start the game. I think I might be confusing myself here a little bit, but at the end of the day, a lot of contributions from a lot of different guys. DeMarcus Elliott was a real force on that defensive line. IU's been looking for someone to step up in that front four, and Elliott seems to really have grabbed the bull by the horns, especially when after the game on Saturday, Tom Allen told us that defensive lineman Juan Harris basically has chosen to leave the game. Chosen to leave football. And Harris was
not just the game, the entire game sport. The whole sport.
Yeah, and so Harris was a guy who was on the field pretty frequently for IU the first few games. He wasn't Aaron Donald or anything, but he was definitely a key contributor on the defensive line. So he's no longer with the program or with the sport. And Elliott really rose and sort of seized the opportunity on Saturday. But again, everything here is with a grain of salt, just because. Like you said, we've played Eastern Illinois, we've seen IU play UConn, and we've seen IU play Rutgers. Again, credit to the Hoosiers for thumping those teams, for blowing them out. But from here on, we're talking about 6 games where really a lot of these are going to come down to one possession. I'd be surprised if maybe I would be surprised if more than just the Penn State game was a blowout. Penn State's really good, and IU's going there, and it's going to be tough to play in Happy Valley. So, that one could be a 2, 3, 4 score type of game. But really, the other 5, and I'm saying, wow, that one should be close. Nebraska should be close. Northwestern, Michigan, you name it. Like it's going to be every you talk about splitting hairs, you talk about every play mattering. I think that's what you're going to see going forward. But tip of your cap to the defense for shutting out Rutgers.
Mm-hmm.
It's the fourth time under Tom Allen they've actually kept an opponent to 0 points, which is difficult regardless of who the opponent is. I remember seeing, I think it was New Mexico State, score a touchdown against Alabama earlier this year. So again, good job by the defense to stay focused, especially after the bye week. Off the top of my head, I can't recall any injuries, and they got a couple of guys back like Reese Taylor in the secondary, for example, and he played pretty well. So if you ask Tom Allen where, and somebody did, where do you see your team right now? He's confident, he's excited, he's optimistic, and now it's just time to play.
Yeah. You talked about the second shutout of the season, fourth since 2017, since Tom Allen, under Tom Allen, which is you've heard all records. The only time since like 91 that there's been that many, but since 2017, since that span that Indiana has started getting those shutouts. If you listen to the Hoosier Sound Offs, you've already heard this, but Indiana is tied for first in the Big Ten with the amount of shutouts since that time span. Wisconsin has 4 as well. Then you look on a national scale, Clemson has only had 1 shutout since that time in 2017. Alabama has had 4 total. So it's really hard to shut out an opponent, no matter the caliber, even as an FCS school, because you see Alabama play a lot of really, really easy games, basically, especially compared to them. And you think of just Alabama compared to Indiana, they're 2, 3, 4 times, they're 2, 3, 4 like better tiers than Indiana, yet they play the same kind of opponents, sometimes worse opponents than Indiana does. And Alabama's only had 4 shutouts as well. And you think of just the amount of defensive players that Alabama sometimes has going to the NFL, no less, and being incredible NFL athletes, no less, that it's something definitely to not overlook. Like you said, tip of the cap to them, no matter what. I think the thing that stood out to me most was just, even against Rutgers, they played team defense. If you just look at the total tackles, there was not one person that dominated and everyone else kind of just fell into place. It was a huge team aspect. There was the highest amount of total tackles was 6 with Caleb Jones. And when you look at a normal game, a lot of the highest tackles might get about 10 or so, sometimes double digits. But there was 6, then 5, 4, 4, 3, 3, 3, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, and then a bunch of ones for over 50 tackles, and basically the highest was 6, and there were a lot of 3s and 2s. Just everyone was all over the place. That means you can see a lot of communication between things, and Rutgers maybe should have scored at some points because they were probably trying to go for it at times, but still, you got a bunch of sacks that went to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different players got sacks, a bunch of tackles for losses. There were 6 total sacks and 14 total tackles for loss, which is awesome. That's the part you want to see, that defensive front / the linebackers penetrating with blitzes and stuff. So that's what I like to take away. The only part that I think we've all seen is just, I feel like Marcelino Ball hasn't lived up to the expectation we thought we might see, but that's a discussion for another time.
As far as that goes, like, he could have an insanely good game against Maryland or Nebraska, for
that's
example.
Right, yeah.
And
wait to
the
talk
whole
about
story gets rewritten. So exactly.
We'll just wait to talk about that maybe at the end of the season if the same thing kind of happened. But let's move into who won the week. So Nathan, do you have someone that won the week this past week in IU sports?
I do. As usual, an interesting few days in IU sports, especially since our last episode when you guys were on last week. I'm going to give the who won the week recognition to IU freshman goalkeeper Roman Celentano, who was named the Big Ten Defensive Player of the Week after his shutout performance against number 16 Kentucky last Wednesday night here in Bloomington. So top 25 game, freshman goalkeeper. He had a shutout performance, a clean sheet, as the fanatics say. He's from Naperville, so Chicagoland area. I can dig that. He also, it was a second consecutive shutout. So credit to him. He's just a freshman. In fact, he's the second goalkeeper to win Big Ten Defensive Player of the Week for IU after Sean Caulfield won it. The senior won it the week of September 10th. So it's interesting. You get a couple of different goalkeepers winning Big Ten Defensive Player of the Week. And now IU keeps their season rolling as far as the men's soccer team goes. They On Friday night, excuse me, it is at Maryland on Friday night, and that's a big time top 10 matchup between two just blue blood soccer programs. They met last year in the Final Four. Um, so that it should be an awesome. It's going to be on Big Ten Network. It's one of many IU Maryland contests on Big Ten Network this week.
Yeah, I'm doing the email thread recently since we lost another contributor that was men's soccer, women's soccer, volleyball, football. I don't remember if I'm leaving anyone out. From Wednesday to Saturday, everyone travels to Maryland. It's not even like one of them comes to Indiana. Everyone's going to College Park. So everyone just might as well carpool. One big bus, one charter plane, whatever, all the way to College Park. So if you're in the DC area like me, you can go to any of the games slash matches. I think there's one Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday too. So you can take your pick: men's soccer, women's soccer, volleyball, football, Wednesday through Saturday. Go to College Park, look at a lot of those games. The one I wanted to add one of those things in there as well because if you are a football nut, a professional football nut, you have heard that the XFL obviously is coming around and that the XFL has had their draft today, and T. Gray Scales is got drafted in the ninth round. I think eighth overall, and you think about that, ooh, ninth round, really? But these are drafting entire teams. So it's not like it's the NFL draft where you get 7 picks. They have to draft an offense and a defense and special teams and backups and everything. So he was 72nd overall. I think there were other IU people as well that were getting into it. I just haven't. It's been very recent, so I just haven't checked. You can follow the Pro Hoosiers Twitter page. They do great stuff with following those people. But let's move into. Wait, before I did that, I forgot. Ben on Twitter asked Rutgers recap. We got a bunch of questions this week on Twitter and Facebook. Ben asked this had to do with the Rutgers game. How many grains of salt should we take with the Rutgers win? I have a feeling the next matchup could be a real test after what has essentially been 2 bye weeks, especially given how close the past few Maryland IU games have been. So, Nathan, we've kind of answered it, but how many grains of salt should we take the Rutger win?
Yeah, I guess with some, simply because they're just so bad. Like, I'm not gonna beat a dead horse any longer, but they are, and there's it doesn't matter if you won that game 75-0. It just didn't. IU could have. They took the foot off the gas pedal. They weren't doing much complicated stuff out there. It was like hand it to Stevie Scott left, right, up the middle. Mix and match players in there. It is what it is. Forget what's happened in the past with this team. Honestly, I was more impressed with IU's loss at Michigan State than I was with how they played at home against Rutgers.
Yeah.
And now you have everything to play for. Maryland, Nebraska, Northwestern, you name it. Everything is in front of IU. If they win by a point or 3 points or 7 points or whatever at Maryland, that's going to be a really good Saturday for the Hoosiers. So everything from this point forward matters a whole lot more than everything that's happened to this point.
Yep, totally agree. Not much to take away, just other that we're now expecting Indiana to dominate some of these games, and they're living up to those expectations, which is certainly something we couldn't say even a few years ago. So I think that is something to take away from it. All right, speaking of winning 75-0, as our next opponent did win their very first game 79-0, and yet it means basically nothing from what they've done since then, which is a great segue. The Maryland game this Saturday, like we've said, College Park. Every IU is traveling to Maryland this weekend, the DC area. But this Saturday, the 19th, 3:30 p.m. on BTN, 3:30 p.m. Eastern. ESPN Matchup Predictor has a 50.3% chance in favor of Indiana, which is just barely over 50%. So it kind of gets you to think of at least what ESPN is looking at Indiana right now, because you always got to give the home team just a slight bump. So they think right now the Indiana team is just slightly above Maryland. But the line I saw at one point started out as 2.5, but I saw another line was 5 in favor of Indiana so far. The over/under, at least as of the recording of this podcast, I've seen consistently at 57. So both teams scoring around 30s or so. All right. I think to sum up this Maryland team from the entire season is just a big, question mark. And I think that's what we're going to get into, because we're going to talk about one thing and then we're going to contradict ourselves in another way because Maryland did something different and then they did something different on this side. And basically, the takeaway of this entire preview is going to be, I don't know. Saturday could be completely the opposite of what we talk about, since we've seen 5, 6, 7, 8 different Maryland teams, basically. We'll say 6 different teams since they've had 6 different games. But they have, Brian just said it, the line is now 5.5 at the time of recording this podcast. So it's going up. It started at 2.5. It's going up to 5.5. So that's nice to see, closer to a 7-point game, which is pretty big. All right. So Maryland had their first game, beat Howard 79-0. Then they beat Syracuse 63-20. At this point in the season, you're thinking like, all right, maybe they're not too bad. My prediction over the summer, where I was not high on Maryland whatsoever, I was like, uh-oh, am I going to eat my words later? But then it comes back over to my side a little more, where Maryland loses to Temple 20-17. Then they lost to Penn State 59-0. I guess you can't take too much away from that. It's kind of like Indiana with Ohio State, but it's still 59-0. They beat Rutgers 48-7. Okay, same outcome as Indiana had. But then the big one that everyone is like, okay, what is going on with Maryland, is that they lose to Purdue. At the time, 1-4 Purdue, 40-14. It wasn't even a close matchup. Close for about half a game, and then Purdue blew away with it. So take a pause, because, all right, Maryland has also had a bunch of different change in position. So they started with Josh Jackson was the starter at the beginning of the year. He played about 4.5 games before getting injured with some leg injury. Again, specifics not terribly been out there, more or less. So then they've had Ty Pickrome that has come in. Did I say that right?
I think you were on it. Yeah, it's close
I think
enough.
so. Yeah, that came in for half the game after Josh Jackson got injured, and then also played against Purdue, which he's no stranger to starting. We've seen him before, literally. He's played against Indiana in games, but so they've had one quarterback that you see that is more of definitely a pocket passer who has run for negative rushing yards, and then you go to a quarterback that we will most probably likely see. There hasn't been an update officially on if Josh is playing on Saturday or not, but just by the looks of it, like we think Hunter Littlejohn, we think he probably won't play, so we'll see Ty, who has in his 1.5 games he's 34 for 57, which is basically a 60% passer completion percentage for 329 yards, 0 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. But then you look on the ground, he's at 18 rushing attempts for 127 yards, 1 touchdown, and a very, very long touchdown, a 61-yard touchdown against Purdue. Then you go to the running back side, and I'm not going to take too much out of this so I can give Nathan a breather, but this just kind of proving my point of the amount of just question marks that we have on Maryland, because you've got Anthony McFarland that usually is the starting running back that gets most of the carries, but he's had a nagging injury. So then you've got Javon Leake and Tayon Fleet Davis that have gotten a lot of carries. This is, if there's ever a team that you say running back by committee, all 3 of these guys have almost had basically, I'll put an average of basically 40 attempts each. It's been very close for all of them. They've all had a lot of yards, and they get a lot of touchdowns. Before I dive into other specific things, Nathan, I'm going to take a breath and hand it over to you. Just continuing the big question mark that is Maryland for this Saturday as of this point in the season.
Yeah, they're a weird team. I think you know, in summary, they're a strange ball club. The highs have been really high. The lows have been really low. Frankly, if I could summarize Maryland as much as I can, I would say they're a team whose whole is less than the sum of their parts. In other words, they've got a lot of talented players. You talked about Jackson, the quarterback, Virginia Tech transfer. He kind of took the world by storm his freshman season. His first game against West Virginia, national TV game, and he played pretty well. He's a 6'2", 220, sort of prototypical dual threat quarterback, but he hasn't run much. He ran a ton his first year at Virginia Tech. He ran for over 300 yards and 6 touchdowns. But he hasn't done much since. And if he's going to play, you've got to think he's going to be limited a bit as far as mobility is concerned, because that injury he's got is an ankle leg sort of situation. So we'll see what happens there. The running back crew is, I think, what makes Maryland a tough matchup. And I think The running back group is what keeps Tom Allen up at night this week.
Agreed.
McFarland has a high ankle sprain. I believe Maryland coach Mike Loxley mentioned that earlier today in his availability. So I think the plan is for him to play. He only had 4 carries, who chose Maryland over schools like Alabama and Miami. So Nick Saban wanted McFarland to play for the Crimson Tide. Instead, McFarland said, hey, let me go to Maryland where I'll probably get some more playing time. And he got a ton of it last year, resulting in a second team All Big Ten selection behind a guy like Jonathan Taylor, who we're seeing is taking the world by storm this year at Wisconsin. So that group with McFarland, Javon Leak, and Fleet Davis, those guys are going to cause a lot of problems for IU. Something else to keep an eye out for. Maryland this year has the second most touchdown drives in all of college football that have lasted under a minute. They have 10 touchdown drives this year that have lasted under a minute. They're a quick strike offense. They look for the big plays. Now, granted, 8 of those 10 have come against Howard and Rutgers. And look, I can't talk out of both sides of my mouth here. I told most of you not to pay much attention to IU's performance against Rutgers. I don't think you should pay much attention to Maryland's against Rutgers. But at the same time, I think it is valuable to note that they're willing to move the ball quickly. They want to look deep. And these guys, especially the running backs, are able to make safeties miss at the second and third level and really finish off those big runs like we saw J.K. Dobbins do a few times against Indiana back in week 3. So the defensive line and the linebackers are going to be tested more than anything. And if Jackson is out, resulting in Tyrell Pigrome starting for Maryland, he's not much of a passer.
Nope.
He's just not. He's 38 for 66 on the season, and it looks worse than that, in all honesty. He's inaccurate. He's a bit indecisive, and his strength is running the football. So if it's Pigrome starting at quarterback and McFarland, Leak, Fleet Davis in the backfield, this almost might be almost one of those triple option type offenses that you see sometimes with Navy or Air Force or whatever, where Maryland runs the ball 2 out of every 3 or 3 out of every 4 plays. And that's where guys like DeMarcus Elliott are going to have to step up. Guys like, Raekwon Jones and Cam Jones and Marcelino Ball and that linebacking group, they're going to be put under examination on Saturday. And it's going to be interesting to see how it all works out. McFarland's ankle injury, I think is a pretty big deal. I think that gives IU a little bit more hope. This is a guy who ran for over 200 yards against the Hoosiers last season. And if McFarland, when he's healthy, he's a home run threat every single play. I don't know exactly who I would compare him to as far as NFL goes, but when McFarland is on fire, he can be one of the most dangerous players in all of college football. So with an ankle injury, he's going to be limited a little bit. But with that said, IU's front 7 is still going to be tested. And you could probably include the safeties as well. Does Kane Womack bring them down to try to control the run game? And if he does, well, then you've got guys like Brian Fitzgerald and Reese Taylor and maybe Ashawn Riggins if he returns. You have these corners maybe one-on-one on an island against wide receivers, and that occasional pass, they've got to be ready to stop it.
Yeah. All right, let's take a small step back, and first I'll go over the S&P Plus ratings for both teams. And if you haven't seen, it's been all over Twitter as a great thing. The Hoosiers are now 25th overall in S&P Plus, so take what you will about that. It's their rankings if you want to put a lot of stock into them or not, but nevertheless, they're top 25. I did ask Bill Connolly on Twitter, and a lot of people liked it. I think everyone was actually wondering. I asked when the last time Indiana was rated top 25 in the S&P Plus. He never got back to me, as he does for some people, but top 25, they went up overall from last week at 28th. Their offense moved up again, 3 or 4 spots. They're at 23rd for the offense. Defense moved up a bunch of spots again. They're 32nd for defense, and special teams moved up quite a few spots to 14th overall. So special teams are top 15 back in the starting to get more of the elite caliber, which we've seen great games from the special teams, but then we've seen special teams where, if the game wasn't out of reach already, they definitely would have possibly caused a loss for them. But all right, going to our opponent, S&P Plus, overall Maryland's 43, offense 56, defense 44, special teams 125. So there's a huge difference. That 125 out of 130. So right now their special teams are not capitalizing whatsoever. I'm going to take a small step backwards and just look at the four after the first two games against Syracuse and Howard, the blowout games, because at this point, I'm just going to look at the last 4-ish weeks against Temple, Penn State, Rutgers, and Purdue, and I put together the stats. So I even added Rutgers in there for them, so I didn't just have all of the losses and what their statistics were and all the losses. But in those 4 games, they're averaging just slightly under 20 points per game. They're giving up 31.5 points per game. So they're losing 31.5 to about 20. They are their offense is going for about 340 yards total, 189 passing, 151 running. But this is where all of this starts to contradict yourself, because the last game and a half you've changed QBs, which have been a completely different style in football. Which then those yards are going to completely shift again. But I think the defense is the key stat in here, because the defense hasn't changed too drastically, even though the offense has had a lot of ups and downs, more or less. The defense, even with the Rutgers win, the defense has given up 477 yards on average per game. They've given up almost 500 yards on average per game, most of them through the air, 320 pass, 157 run. And Penn State, I think they gave up 650-ish, 630, 650 yards to Penn State. So we're about to talk about the defense, which is a positive at a lot of points, their strength of their entire team. But even if you add like that Rutgers win in there, they are giving up a lot of passing yards. And Brian Tonsoni, coach in the chat, said had a couple things, and then basically said we will score 30 plus. And I totally agree with that. I think this is going to be a game that is more or less of a shootout, and that's going to come down to our defense / their offense. What does their offense look like? So I am going to real quick, receiver, Dante Demas Jr., that's basically their guy. 23 catches, 384, 3 touchdowns, averaging a bunch of yards per game. Not much, about 64 per game. So it's not too much, but that's really their only receiver. You've got Daryl Jones, Brian Cobbs, 2 guys you might see their name, but they do have really 2 good, really tight ends. I am 100% going to butcher this name, but Chigozium Okonkwo and then Tyler Mabry are those 2 tight ends that are getting a lot of reps, actually. So let's move over. Oh, and their offensive line has given up 13 sacks on the season as well. So that's about 2-ish a game. So their offensive line, ups and downs, I guess. How about you give your first perspective on the Maryland defense?
Well, the way I look at it, I agree with Coach, and I agree with something you touched on as well. I think this is going to be a high-scoring game. I think IU is going to be able to score on Maryland, and Maryland's such a big question mark, but I think Maryland's going to be able to score a good number of points against the Hoosiers. So I think it's going to work both ways. As far as Maryland's defense is concerned, to me, their star player is Keandre Jones. He's an outside linebacker, transfer from Ohio State, someone who Urban Meyer obviously recruited to join the Buckeyes. He moved on, came to Maryland, and he's got 5.5 sacks this year. So I'm not going to put him quite at Chase Young's level by any means from Ohio State earlier that the Hoosiers saw. But remember, in that game, they had Coy Cronk. So this will be, I think, Keandre Jones as an individual matchup will be tougher than anyone Matthew Bedford and Caleb Jones have faced outside of Chase Young. I'm not sure how much Caleb Jones went against Chase Young in week 3, but Michigan State's defensive line as a whole is much better than Maryland's, but Keandre Jones, dangerous pass rusher. As Brian just pointed out in the chat, they did lose one of their defensive backs to injury against Purdue back on Saturday. Tino Ellis is a corner who's experienced. He started a bunch of games for Purdue. He got hurt. He's going to miss the game. So all of a sudden you look up and down the depth chart and you say, yeah, this is another game where Michael Penix can put up some big time numbers in the passing game. And he might even be able to use his legs a little bit to keep Maryland off guard. But there really doesn't seem to be any excuse for guys like Nick Westbrook or Whop Filio or Donovan Hale or Ty Freifogel, you name it. There's no excuse really for the receivers not to show out on Saturday against Maryland. The weather should be nice. Maryland lost their starting corners we talked about. They lost Darnell Savage last year, who was a first-round pick, a safety who went into the NFL draft, got taken by Green Bay. So this is a defensive backfield for Maryland that's going to really struggle. IU should not have much of a problem scoring points as long as they don't give the ball away, as long as they don't suffer some sort of surprising injuries during the game. They should be all right. But it seems like a turnover once or twice almost every game here. We saw it against we saw it against Rutgers. We saw it against UConn. It just happens. You got to avoid those big ones, especially if Maryland actually ends up scoring a pick six or fumble recovery touchdown or something like that. So as far as the Terps defense is concerned, there's not much there. Jack Plummer, the backup quarterback for Purdue on Saturday, threw for 420 yards against these guys. David Bell, the freshman receiver from Indy, tore him up. I would be surprised if IU's offense didn't put up those same kind of numbers, especially considering how hot they are right now.
Yep. You mentioned turnovers, giving the ball up. That's the biggest thing. I don't think you mentioned this, that the stat you found. They've got, what'd you say, 18 games, 18 consecutive games that they've gotten a turnover in. They get turnovers. This defense gets turnovers. And honestly, even if you can't stop the opponent, if you get turnovers and you stop the opposing team from getting those possessions to try and score, that's another way to win. So they do get turnovers, and that's how they can win. So I think that the key, like you said, that's the biggest key for the offense. If they don't give the ball up, they're going to be in really good shape already. They've gotten 5 interceptions and 5 fumble recoveries on the year so far. They've also gotten 17 total sacks. So you think about 2 turnovers per game, about 3 sacks per game-ish. So it's not great, but it's also not nothing. So they're able to get pressure. They're able to, like we said, get turnovers. You mentioned DeAndre Jones already, 5.5 sacks, 1 fumble recovery. I'll let you jump in real quick.
No, everything with Maryland just seems to be explosiveness, big plays. Like, they may suck for 9 plays in a row, and then the 10th play, they'll score a pick six or they'll hit an 80-yard touchdown. So IU just going to have to stay steady all day on Saturday.
Yep. Linebackers, like you've said, that's kind of where their core is for their defense. That's where a lot of their talent resides. Like you said, Keandre Jones, 5.5 sacks, got a fumble recovery already, but you also got, again, I'm going to butcher it, Ayinde, and then Eli, 46 total tackles, a fumble recovery, an interception. So you've got a couple guys, and there are a few. The other couple linebackers have gotten a lot of tackles and a lot of depth, and that's just where their depth and that's where their talent is. I think who'd you say the injury was to again for their cornerback?
Tino Ellis.
Okay.
Is out for the year. But Antoine Brooks is a pretty good player there too.
Exactly. Yeah, that's where I was about to get to. Antoine Brooks Jr., 36 tackles. He's the only guy not named a linebacker, basically, that's getting a bunch of tackles this year. He's got 3 pass deflections, 1 fumble recovery already on the season. So that's the one guy to look out for. But if that's really the only guy Indiana does, even if you haven't seen a lot from Donovan Hale and Nick West to have seen recently, Antoine covers Watt Filler, you got those 2 guys. He covers another guy, you got another. Let alone Peyton Hendershot, who was sort of quiet last game in a way. He still scored, but anyway, you've got a bunch of offensive projections. And Brian Tonsoni, again, totally agree with his stuff. If we can hold it to 24 points or less, we win. Agree. It's going to kind of just be slowing their defense. They're slowing their offense down, making sure Indiana's offense doesn't give the ball up, and I think that's just going to be how it goes. Limiting mistakes. If you take care of what you need to, the Maryland game is going to be, I think, a win if you do a few of those things. The one interesting fact is that they have not made a single field goal this season. They are 0 for 2. They have not made 1 field goal. They're 26 for 27 for point after attempts. So interesting stat. But let's get to a couple questions on Twitter and Facebook. These 2 are Maryland-specific ones before we get into a couple others that people sent in. So Benjamin on Twitter, is Maryland a must-win? I think so, ... I will also go in, I'll give you your answer, and then he commented on his own thing. So Benjamin, is Maryland a must-win? He thinks so.
It's funny, right? It's must-win based on what? right? Like if your goal for the season is 6 wins, it's not a must win because
Yep.
there are different paths to 6. But if you, like me, feel like this team, based on what we've seen so far this season and based on what we've seen from other opponents this year, if IU is if talent resulted in wins, I think this team is capable of winning 7 or 8 games. And if you want to see IU meet that talent standard, they should win this game. But again, if the goal is 6, then I don't necessarily consider this the must win. I would probably look at the Northwestern game as a must win, for example, as
Yeah.
far as the 6-win target. Probably look at the Purdue game as a must win, especially if IU only has 5 wins at that point, which, I mean, who knows how this thing is going to go.
Exactly.
But
Yeah.
I'm not going there quite yet. But look, from a big picture standpoint, if IU plays poorly on Saturday, I think that would be a pretty significant negative reflection of the program, of the head coach, of the coordinators, really sort of at the highest level. We'll see what happens in College Park.
Yeah, and like you said, I think it's just what you define and what your expectations are on this season. And as our expectations grow, a lot of it was maybe 6-6 this year. I think now the expectation should be 7-5, honestly, before going into the bowl game. And like you said, yeah, 6-6. No, not technically, no. I mean, we've got 6 games to get 2 wins, technically. So, no, not officially. But I mean, depends on how many steps in the right direction you want to take this year. If you want to take a few steps in the right direction and stop doing typical Indiana football things, yeah, it's a must win. I mean, really, it's the Northwestern game, and then you put Purdue and Maryland next to each other because we don't really know how both of those teams are. So, Purdue could end up being a better team than we think by the end of the season. So, maybe this game is a must win. But, like as Coach said in the chat, it's a must win for program development. So I think in that sense, 100% it's a must win, especially if they're going to get to 5-7 and even that dream of maybe 8-4, because that's still on the table technically, without even reaching too far, like beating Penn State or something. So yeah. And then on the other side, Tom from Facebook asked how big. Well, no, wait. Benjamin answered his own thing. Every game is a must win, but these games, Indiana has to show it's better. On paper, Maryland has actually recruited better the last 4 years in the Big Ten, 7th, 4th, and 5th, before last season at 10th. At that QB spot is where our Hoosiers have a big time advantage, 1-0. I also agree with that statement as well. I like adding the recruiting, how Maryland's done better at a lot of that stuff. But on to Tom's question on Facebook. How big of a blow will it be if we can't get past Maryland Saturday? Seeing as they were crushed by Purdue, it seems likely that we need this one to keep our bowl hopes trending up. What do you think?
Yeah, it's funny. I remember hearing, I forgot who it was back in on Chicago sports radio a few years ago. Everyone gets excited when football season starts. They look at the schedule and they say, "Oh, this game's a win. This game's a win. This game's a win. This game maybe not so much," and so on. When Maryland saw their schedule at the start of the year, I think all of them circled this game against Indiana as a win, and I think that's a bit. IU fans need to be a little bit wary of that. Maryland's facing the Hoosiers in between road games at Purdue, at Minnesota, home game Michigan, at Ohio State. If Maryland loses this game, it is going to damage their program significantly. Now, when I look at the IU side, it just being around Memorial Stadium on Saturday after the game, I got the vibe that this team is focused. This team is determined. The IU football team I'm talking about here, and Tom Allen really has sort of led the charge in that area. They're zoned in for this game, which also means if they lose it, it could have some sort of domino effect for the weeks to follow. Again, we talk about how important that the Nebraska game is, the Northwestern game is. I don't know how easy IU will bounce back up off the mat if they fall on Saturday. They seem really determined to beat the Terrapins on Saturday. We'll see if it happens. To answer the question, I don't know. I guess you'd have to ask the players that, in all seriousness, how demoralizing would it be to lose this kind of game? I'm not sure. A lot comes down to how the players respond if they do fall short.
Yeah, I think the answer to that question will come if they do fall short. What's the Nebraska game like? Do they get blown out? Do they lose, or do they win in a tougher road environment against Nebraska that usually Indiana doesn't lose? All right, no, let's go to Logan on Twitter. If we win the next 3 games, do we beat Michigan? To me, I don't think that changes anything if we win 2 games, 1 game, 3 games. The only thing I think that potentially that we beat Michigan to say, do we beat Michigan for sure? The only thing that will sway me a lot more in that direction, at least as of now, because I'm just gonna be on the wait and see thing for Indiana football. I don't think they can't, or I don't think they can't beat Michigan, but I'm just gonna wait and see until they actually do it. The only thing that might change my mind a little more to be more optimistic is if they blow out the next 3 games, basically, or 2 of them they have blowouts, more or less. Do you agree or disagree?
Yeah, I'll be honest. I agree with most of what you said. I'll just say it point blank. If Michael Penix is the quarterback, I think that's what it comes down to. If Penix is the quarterback, IU is capable of winning that game, regardless of how the next 3 go. In all seriousness,
Yeah.
I think IU fans, if possible, might be underestimating exactly how good Penix is right now. He has been absolutely on fire. Now, he's made some mistakes, but even some of those mistakes have been impressive. For example, the interception against Rutgers, he stood in the face of pressure, took the hit, made a throw, and the Rutgers defensive back made a good play on the football. It happens. You're going to have those kind of plays in college football. The guy is I'm not saying he's Tua Tagovailoa at this point. He's not. But, if he keeps ascending at this rate, Penix is absolutely going to be one of the hottest quarterbacks talked about as far as NFL considerations go in a few years. And even right now, forget potential. Right now, if Penix is taking the snaps against Michigan, IU winning that game. I think Michigan will still be favored, but IU has a chance of winning that game.
Which you just answered the next question. Theo on Twitter asked, "Is Michael Penix the shot in the arm that could get the Hoosiers over the hump?" You literally just answered that question in all of it. The
Yes.
answer
To be
is
honest,
yes.
yes, he is. He's
Yes.
really good, guys. I'm excited to see how his career improves here as the years go on.
All right, last question. Richie on Twitter, does Coach Allen deserve a contract extension, especially if we go to a bowl game this year? What do you think?
I don't, that's. If I recall, they extended Kevin Wilson for making maybe it was 1 or 2 bowl games. I'm a little my memory's a little fuzzy there, but yeah, I'd give it to him again. It's tough in the Big Ten East. It really is when you almost start with 4 games where you're starting off with losses, especially when you have to go to Michigan State on the road. I think it would be under consideration. I don't know what kind of dollar amount we're talking. But Fred Glass has made it clear that he's a fan of Tom Allen, and a bowl game I think would result in that extension after the regular season ends.
I was trying to find real
Yeah.
quick because that question came. Oh, contract length 6 years. I mean, not this year. I think you still can wait at least another year to see what it is. But honestly, if they make a bowl game this year, the expectations are going to continue to climb. And the way this team is starting to develop and the way he's been recruiting, there's no reason to climb. So I don't think this year, regardless of if they make a bowl game or don't make a bowl game, will answer that question. I think honestly, the way this year goes, in addition to next year / the year after that, will really show us if he deserves a contract. But I tend to go more of you if I had to answer this question right now. If he had to get an extension, yes or no, at this very second, I'd have to say yes at the moment, just with the way things are trending. But of course, this is when the Hoosiers are 4-2 and haven't had 6 games left. All right. That about wraps it up for our 110th show of the Hoosier Sound. Thank you guys so much for joining us, and thank you to that live audience for coming out and participating in the chat section. We really appreciate your support. We'll be back next Monday for another edition of the Hoosier Sound Off. News and updates come through Twitter, and subscribe to our show so you don't miss out on our weekly episodes. Most importantly, if you enjoy our show, leave us a review, tell a friend, share our links. Your support is really how we grow this podcast so we can reach those passionate IU fans such as yourself. But as always, thank you for listening, Hoosier Nation, and we'll see you next time.
See you later.